So here we are now for strategies for risk. After we talked about all of the risks, there are certain ways of helping to manage them and other sort of, at least some statistics that might help us sort of understand and try and figure out, depending on what kind of risks our clients are willing to accept, what type of investments are going to be appropriate. So if we think about it, we got risk perception, the perception of risks, how scary and terrifying they might be. We've got the analysis, let's look at it, see what they are. And then we've got the management. You can manage the risks. May not actually be that big a deal. We may be able to plan on it and actually make money off of it, or at least stay the same. Diversification. This is the purpose of mutual funds, to diversify the risk, to allow investors to purchase lots of companies, so if a single company goes out of business, their entire portfolio doesn't go down the tubes. Certain risks can be diversified away. Those are called non-systematic risks. Business risk, credit, reinvestment, liquidity. Buy a bunch of different things, and you're not going to have too much of any one of these risks because you're going to have so many companies. Some risks cannot be diversified away. Those are called systematic risks, market risk. If the market crashes, all stocks crash. I don't care how many stocks you have. Portfolio rebalancing. This is moving assets around to put it back in the original percentages chosen, to rebalance the percentages. In any given year, some assets will grow, others will shrink. Rebalancing is then selling some of the winners to buy more of the losers, because next year things could switch. If I am doing a portfolio where, let's just keep it simple, I want 50% stocks and 50% bonds. And this year, stocks outperformed bonds. So now, beginning of next year, I have 60% stocks because they grew, and 40% bonds. Maybe they grew, maybe they shrank, but either way, because stocks grew so much more than bonds, the bonds are now a smaller portion of my portfolio. But I don't know what next year is going to be. I still think 50-50 is the right overall proportion. So I'm going to sell 10% of the money from the stocks and buy the 10% in the bonds. So I'm going to be rebalancing, so it's going to be back to 50-50 bonds and stock. And you could do this with any number of different asset classes. Hedging, as I discussed earlier when we were thinking chapter 1, was when we talked about the idea of hedging versus speculating with options. Hedging is the idea of insurance. Buying negatively correlated investments. Correlation is basically things moving together. It doesn't mean that they're related. There's a whole site, and if you will let me know, I may put the link below, simply because as a former math teacher, they're going to come and string me up if every time I mention correlation, I don't also mention correlation does not imply causation. There are certain things that are incredibly highly correlated that are totally unrelated. There are some things that are correlated that are related, but the idea, if you have a correlation of 1, that means if something moves up 5, this is going to move up 5. If it moves up, it moves up. If it moves down, the others move down. They're perfectly in movement. When one moves, the other moves, same amount, same speed. If they're -1, that means it's opposite. When one moves up, the other moves down. When the other one moves down, the other moves up, opposite. Correlation of 0 means basically random. If one moves up, no clue what the other one's going to do. You don't generally want investments that are all moving at the same time. You want some that are sort of random to others, some that may be opposite them. So overall, they're all balancing and your overall portfolio then's rising. That's the correlation idea. You could also think of buying puts when you were long the security. You bought the stock. Or you could certainly think of it as the same idea when buying a call when you're short the stock, when you're short the security. When you sold borrowed shares, you're worried about the stock going up. Buying a call profits when the stock goes up. Benchmarks and indices. An index is a statistical tool designed to measure performance of something over time. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, the Dow Jones Index, measures the performance of 30 big companies. The Consumer Price Index measures inflation. The Dow isn't real. It's a list of 30 companies. They track what those 30 companies do and say, okay, this is what the Dow is doing. It's not a real thing. It's a statistical tool. Same thing with the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That's a grouping of a bunch of things in a basket of goods where every year we look at the price. No one's actually buying that basket. That basket doesn't actually exist. It's a statistical tool. We look at what would the cost of this basket be this year or this month and that next year, and we can see what the inflation would be. Benchmark is something that serves as a standard by which other things are measured or judged, a point of reference. Almost all benchmarks are in fact indexes. Not all indexes are actually benchmarks, sort of the idea of fingers and thumbs. All thumbs are fingers, not all fingers are thumbs. Beta. Let's start talking Greek. I'm sure some of you already thought I started talking Greek a long time ago, but let's make it official. Beta, second letter of the Greek alphabet. This is the risk of a security compared to an underlying index or benchmark. A beta of 0.8 means if the index is moving up 10, this is moving up 0.8 times 10, or it should move up 8. If the market moves down 5, a security of a beta of 0.8 is expected to move 0.8 times 5, move down 4. Less than 1 means it's going to be less aggressive, less risky than the underlying index or benchmark at which it's being compared to. Negative beta means the opposite. A beta of negative 0.8 means if the index moves up 10, this should move down 8. If the index moves up 5, down 5, this should move up 4. Beta of less than 1 means the security is less risky than the underlying index or benchmark. Beta of more than 1 means that the security is more risky than the underlying index or benchmark. Beta tells us what the expected return should be given the level of risk. Beta is a measure of risk generally compared to the market risk of that investment and the underlying market of the index at which it's being compared to. One more Greek. Alpha. Alpha is the difference between what is expected, which we find using beta, and what actually is returned. It's generally used to measure the effectiveness of a money manager. I'm going to have some examples below about how alpha and beta are calculated. But if we think about it, if I have a beta of 0.6 and the market moves up 10 and my investment moves up 8, well, my beta of 0.6, market of plus 10, means my expected, what I should do is I should move up 6. But I actually moved up 8. That's 2 more than I should have. That's an alpha of plus 2. If instead of returning 8, I actually returned 4, again, beta of 0.6, market moves up 10, I should move up 6. I actually moved up 4. That's 2 less. That's a negative 2 alpha. That brings us to the end of this section. We got one more unit left, and then we are done with this material. So I hope you are enjoying it so far. There isn't much less left, and I will see you shortly.